You've entered Haunted Secrets, a place of dark comfort, where horror breathes slow and dreams turn haunted. Close your eyes. Let's begin with the story now. The scream didn't come from outside. It came from inside the van. At least that's how it felt when it first pierced the air, echoing through the rattling walls of the Chevy as rain pounded mercilessly on the roof. Michael jerked the steering wheel, nearly skidding off the narrow stretch of Route 66, the headlights flaring across the storm-slicked asphalt. The cry was high-pitched, shrill and unnatural, too sharp for a human, too desperate for an animal. It vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by thunder, leaving behind a silence so thick the four friends inside could hear their own shallow breathing. "Tell me you all heard that," Emily whispered, her knuckles tight around the seat in front of her. No one answered, because each of them was wrestling with the same chilling thought. The scream hadn't come from outside the van. It had been inside with them. This road was never on their plan. They were supposed to cruise through familiar stops, dive diners, neon motels, and tourist traps that made Route 66 famous. Instead, fate had pushed them into the forgotten veins of Arizona's desert, a stretch even truckers avoided after dark. The detour had seemed harmless at first. A rugged trucker at a gas station had suggested it, swearing it was faster and more scenic. Now, miles from the main road, the storm had swallowed the sky. The GPS spun like a compass possessed, and their excitement for the last ride had dissolved into uneasy silence. Josh tried to laugh, though his voice cracked. Classic road trip horror cliché, huh? Storm, wrong turn, creepy noises. We'll laugh about this later. But nobody laughed. Not even Sarah, who usually found a joke in everything. She just stared out into the rain, her reflection in the window pale and ghost-like, as if she were already part of the night beyond the glass. Lightning ripped across the desert, turning the endless rows of saguaros into twisted silhouettes, arms raised like skeletal witnesses reaching for the sky. In the flash, Michael swore he saw movement. Something pale darted between the cacti, its shape wrong, its gait broken, almost crawling. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving only rain and shadows. The road ahead forked unexpectedly, one path curving into a valley drowning in fog, the other climbing toward a rotting wooden bridge. The bridge looked fragile, older than the highway itself, its beams warped and blackened with age. Beyond it, a structure towered, vague and skeletal in the storm's haze. Another scream tore through the night. This time, closer, so close. Sarah covered her ears as if it came from right above the van. The sound reverberated through the windshield, vibrating in their bones before fading into the roar of thunder. Emily's lips quivered as she finally spoke, her voice barely audible. That wasn't the wind. And she was right. This wasn't weather. This wasn't coincidence. Something on Route 66 had been waiting for them. The van rolled forward, slowly, its tires splashing against the rising flood, headlights locking on the wooden bridge. For just a heartbeat, when lightning illuminated the world, The skeletal building on the other side revealed itself clearly. Spires snapped in half, windows glowing faintly orange, like dozens of candles flickering in a place long abandoned. Shelter, Michael thought, but the dread that curled in his stomach whispered otherwise. That place wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. And once they crossed that bridge, the last ride they had promised each other would no longer belong to them. It would belong to the thing that screamed in the storm. The bridge moaned before they even touched it. A long, guttural groan rolled across the storm, as if the wood itself resented their approach, warning them to turn back. Michael eased the Chevy forward, the headlights cutting through the wall of rain, and the boards beneath the tires creaked in protest, bending under the van's weight. Every foot they moved forward felt like trespassing, like walking barefoot into a graveyard at midnight. Emily clutched the edge of her seat, whispering prayers under her breath, while Josh tried to steady his voice. It's just old wood, that's all. Bridges creak. But the bridge didn't just creak. It shivered beneath them, sending vibrations through the floor of the van, as if something deep below the water was pushing against it, demanding to be let through. Sarah's eyes were locked on the structure across the way. In the storm's haze, the building revealed itself more fully. An abandoned chapel, its spire shattered, its stone walls cracked and bleeding with ivy. The windows glowed faintly, not with electricity, but with the uneven flicker of firelight, dancing in a rhythm too deliberate, too alive. "Someone's in there," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "People don't just light candles in the middle of a storm." Emily shook her head quickly. No one lives out here. It's probably just left over from..." She cut herself off because even she couldn't believe the lie. Candles didn't just burn endlessly in abandoned ruins. Someone had lit them, recently. The van rolled forward, each board of the bridge screaming louder than the last. The smell of rot and damp wood filled the air, mixing with the sharp metallic tang of rain. Halfway across, lightning split the night again, and in that instant, every one of them saw it. A figure standing in the chapel doorway, tall, motionless, drenched in shadow. Its shape was human, but wrong. Too narrow, its arms dangling like broken branches, its head tilting slightly as though it had been waiting for them. Then, in the next flash of light, the doorway was empty. Emily gasped, pressing her hand over her mouth. Did you see?" "No," Josh interrupted firmly, too quickly, his voice cracking. There was nothing, but his shaking hands betrayed him. As the van finally rolled off the bridge, the storm seemed to lessen, the rain thinning into a mist that clung to the ground like smoke. The world felt quieter here, but not safer. The chapel loomed above them, its crooked cross barely hanging onto the roof, swaying with each gust of wind. The windows pulsed with orange light, almost beckoning, almost breathing. Michael killed the engine, the sudden silence deafening after hours of tires and thunder. The four friends sat in stillness, hearts pounding, staring at the ruin that had appeared like a mirage in the storm. None of them wanted to say it aloud, but they all knew they couldn't go back. The road behind them was drowning. The bridge wouldn't survive another crossing, and the only path left was forward. Josh broke the silence with a nervous laugh. his hand on the door handle. Well, guess we found our shelter. But the moment he pushed the door open, a cold gust swept through the van, snuffing out every trace of warmth inside. It smelled of wet stone and something else, something sweet, rotten, like fruit left to fester in the sun. Sarah gagged, covering her nose. Emily whispered, Don't go in there." But Michael had already stepped into the storm, his shoes sinking into the mud, his eyes fixed on the chapel that had called them across the bridge. And though the others didn't know it yet, the chapel wasn't just waiting for them. It had been summoning them all along. The door opened on its own. Before Michael's hand even touched the rusted iron handle, the chapel's heavy wooden door groaned inward with a long, aching sigh, as though it had been expecting him. A rush of cold, stale air spilled out, carrying with it the sharp scent of mildew and candle wax. Inside, dozens, maybe hundreds of candles burned, their flames trembling in unison, casting shadows that seemed far too tall for the small chapel walls. Emily froze at the threshold, her breath catching in her throat. "Who lit all of these?" she whispered. Josh forced a smirk that failed to hide his unease. Maybe a priest still lives here. But there were no signs of life, no footsteps, no voices, no rustle of movement, just the hollow sound of dripping water, echoing from somewhere deep within. They stepped inside cautiously, the door closing behind them with a dull thud that made all four of them jump. The chapel was skeletal, its pews broken and overturned, the altar cracked down the middle as if struck by lightning years ago. The walls were lined with religious paintings, their surfaces warped and faded, saints' faces twisted into grotesque masks by time and decay. Yet every painting had one disturbing thing in common: the eyes. No matter where they stood, the eyes followed them, painted in dark strokes that seemed too recent, too fresh, as if someone had retouched them not long ago. Sarah shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. This place isn't abandoned. Someone's been here, recently. Michael led the way down the center aisle, his footsteps crunching on broken glass scattered across the stone floor. The candlelight flickered more violently the further they walked, as though recoiling from their presence. In the corner, a confessional booth leaned sideways, its wood blackened as if charred from fire. Emily swore she heard something inside it, a faint shifting, a slow, deliberate breath. She grabbed Michael's arm, whispering urgently, Don't go near it." But curiosity tugged at him, stronger than reason. He took a step closer, and the booth rattled suddenly, violently, like something inside had thrown its weight against the door. Everyone screamed, stumbling back, and then silence, so absolute it felt suffocating. Josh tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "Probably just wind, old wood." His voice faltered as his eyes darted to the altar. Something lay there, something long and covered with a tattered white cloth. The fabric shifted slightly, as if stirred by breath. Emily's voice trembled. "Tell me that's not—" She didn't finish, because the cloth slipped down just enough to reveal what was underneath. a face, pale, waxy, its skin stretched too tightly over bone. Eyes closed, a body laid out like an offering. But before they could process it, the eyes snapped open, milky, lifeless yet aware. Emily shrieked and stumbled backward into a pew, knocking it over with a crash. The candles nearest the altar snuffed out instantly, plunging half the chapel into darkness. The air grew colder, their breaths visible now as pale fog. The body on the altar didn't move again, its eyes closing slowly as if mocking them, retreating into stillness. Sarah clutched Michael's arm, whispering with trembling lips, "We shouldn't be here. We need to leave, now." But when they turned toward the entrance, the chapel door, that had swung open so willingly, was now sealed shut, iron bolts driven across it from the inside, though none of them had heard it lock. The four of them were trapped, and somewhere deep within the chapel, past the altar and shadows, a low hum began to rise, like a chant carried from another world. The chanting spoke their names. At first it was low, almost like a vibration under the stone floor, a hum with no words. But then, clearer, stronger, it shaped itself into syllables, curling through the air like smoke. Michael, Sarah, Emily, Josh. Each name echoed from a different corner of the chapel, as if the building itself knew them, as if the walls had been waiting for them all along. Sarah covered her ears, shaking her head violently. No, it's not real. It's not real. But it was. Every time she tried to block it out, the voice pressed closer, whispering directly into her skull, as intimate as breath on her neck. Michael took a step back, staring at the altar, at the pale figure still lying there with its eyes closed. The chanting seemed to ripple outward from it, pulsing through the room with each flicker of the candles. "We have to leave," Emily hissed, tugging at his arm, her wide eyes glistening with panic. She pointed at the sealed door. "We'll break it down. We'll find a way." Josh, trying to mask his terror with anger, grabbed a wooden pew leg and smashed it against the door's bolts. The sound exploded through the chapel, wood against iron. But the door didn't budge. Instead, the chanting grew louder, faster, almost mocking his effort. Then the pew leg splintered in his hands, sharp wood slicing his palm. He cursed, clutching his bleeding hand, and froze when the drops of blood hit the floor. The stone drank it. That was the only way to describe it. The blood didn't spread or pool. It seeped instantly into the cracks, vanishing as though the chapel itself was thirsty. And with it, the hum shifted into laughter, low, guttural, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Emily screamed and pressed against Michael, her voice breaking. "We shouldn't be here. We never should have come." The candles along the walls flickered violently, their flames bending as if pulled by invisible breath. Shadows grew longer, stretching across the floor until they formed shapes, human-like figures crawling from the corners, twisted and faceless, rising in numbers that made the chapel feel suddenly too small. Their bodies bent at wrong angles, limbs snapping backward like marionettes on tangled strings. The figures didn't step forward. They swayed in unison, back and forth, their heads tilting toward the group as the chanting swelled into a chorus. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing, her voice a ragged whisper. "They know us. How do they know us?" No one answered, because the truth lodged itself coldly into all of their hearts. This wasn't random. They hadn't stumbled here by mistake. Whatever lived in this chapel had called them, lured them off the highway, pulled them through the storm, across the bridge, and locked them inside. Then, the body on the altar sat up, slowly, mechanically. Its head rolled to one side with a sickening crack. The milky eyes snapped open again, but this time they glowed faintly, like embers fanned to life. Its mouth opened wide, too wide, and the chanting stopped all at once. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, heavy and suffocating. Then the body spoke, in a voice not its own, a voice layered, ancient, and inhuman. "The ride ends here." The corpse climbed down from the altar. Its movements were slow at first, deliberate, like a marionette remembering how to walk. Bones cracking with every step. Candlelight clung to its pale skin, stretching shadows across the chapel walls, while its jaw hung open in an impossible gape that emitted no sound, only the stench of rot and earth. The four friends staggered backward instinctively, their eyes locked on the figure as if gravity itself dragged their gaze toward it. Sarah clutched Michael's arm, nails digging into his skin, her breath shaking as she whispered, "It's not supposed to move. Oh my God, it's not supposed to move." The body stepped off the final stone of the altar and landed on the floor with a wet thud that reverberated through the entire room. Its head twitched unnaturally from side to side, bones snapping audibly, as if trying to imitate life but failing at every attempt. Then its mouth finally closed with a sharp click. Slowly, it lifted its hand, pointing one long, decayed finger at Josh. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. Josh froze, his chest rising and falling in quick bursts, blood still dripping from his earlier wound. "Why me?" he rasped, as if the thing could actually answer. The figure tilted its head, eyes glowing faintly brighter, and began to shuffle forward. Each step echoed like a hammer on hollow wood. Josh stumbled back, tripping over a broken pew, his injured hand smearing blood across the floor. The instant it touched stone again, the chapel responded. The cracks lit faintly red, glowing veins spreading like fire beneath their feet. The hum returned, deeper now, almost a growl. Emily screamed and rushed to pull Josh up, her hands trembling violently. But the corpse wasn't rushing. It didn't need to. It walked with the certainty of something that already knew how the night would end. Michael finally snapped from his shock. He grabbed the broken leg of a pew, brandishing it like a weapon, and shouted, "Stay away from him!" His voice echoed across the chamber, but the corpse didn't flinch. It simply stopped moving, its glowing eyes shifting from Josh to Michael. almost curious. Then, impossibly, its jaw unhinged again, stretching wider than before, until the corners of its mouth tore with a sickening rip. And from its throat came not one voice, but many, layered whispers overlapping, like a crowd speaking all at once. Among them, each friend heard something personal. Michael heard his late father calling his name. Emily heard a lullaby her mother used to sing. Josh heard his own voice screaming. And Sarah heard nothing, only silence, which somehow terrified her the most. Suddenly, the candles nearest the creature snuffed out, plunging half the chapel into darkness. In that blackness, more shapes stirred, shadows peeling off the walls, crawling onto the floor, their forms writhing like smoke made solid. They dragged themselves forward on hands and elbows, their faces featureless except for gaping mouths that opened and closed soundlessly. Emily shrieked, pulling Josh away, while Michael swung the broken wood at one of the shadows. The weapon passed straight through, scattering it like mist. But within seconds, it reformed again. The corpse raised both its arms now, as if commanding the shadows, and the floor beneath them pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. The air grew heavy, the smell of blood and candle wax suffocating. "It's conjuring them," Sarah gasped, her voice breaking. "It's not alone. It's never alone." And then, in perfect unison, every shadow turned its faceless head toward the group, mouths opening as one. The sound that followed wasn't human. It was a shriek of hunger, raw and deafening, shaking the walls of the chapel. The ride, it seemed, had only just begun. The shadows leapt onto them all at once. They moved faster than any living thing could, breaking from their swaying rhythm and exploding forward in a black wave. Emily screamed as one crashed into her chest, cold as ice, its weight pinning her against the broken pews. She clawed at it, desperately, her hands slicing through smoke and finding nothing solid. Yet the pressure on her lungs was suffocating. Michael swung the broken wood wildly, slashing through two shadows, scattering them like ashes in the wind, only for them to coil back together and reform around him. Josh fell to the ground, flailing as another shadow latched onto his bleeding hand, its mouth sealing over the wound as if feeding from it. He screamed in agony, the sound cracking like dry wood. Sarah was the worst. 3 of the shapes descended on her at once, wrapping around her shoulders, her head, pulling her backward toward the altar, as though determined to drag her into the corpse's waiting arms. The air in the chapel grew impossibly heavy, every breath like inhaling stone dust. The candles guttered violently, some extinguishing in a rush, while others flared high, spitting sparks that dripped molten wax onto the floor. The corpse at the altar didn't move, but its glowing eyes tracked every struggle, its wide mouth quivering as if savoring the scene. And the whispers returned, not just from the corpse this time, but from the shadows themselves. They hissed in voices that seemed to crawl directly into the friends' skulls. "Stay with us. The ride is over." Michael roared, adrenaline burning through his terror. He seized one of the fallen pew legs and smashed it against the floor, where the red cracks still glowed. To his shock, the shadow that had latched onto him shrieked, not from the hit itself, but from the vibration of the blow against the stone. It loosened its grip, writhing backward like a wounded animal. "The floor!" Michael shouted. "Hit the floor, where the cracks are!" Emily, gasping for air beneath her attacker, slammed her fist down into the glowing fissures. The shadow on her chest wailed and dissolved into a mist that recoiled across the room, rejoining the others. Josh, pale and trembling, forced his bloodied hand against the cracks too, smearing his wound across the glowing lines. The effect was instant. The floor drank greedily, the glow pulsing brighter, and the shadow latched onto him, let out a cry that didn't belong in this world. It retreated, folding into the corners of the chapel. For a moment, it looked like they might be winning. But the victory was short. The corpse at the altar finally moved again. It lifted its arms higher, its fingers curling like talons, and the shadows rallied, as though commanded. They merged together, forming one massive shape that rose from the center aisle, towering over them all. Its head brushed the ceiling, its body stretching like living smoke, dozens of mouths opening and closing across its form, each mouth whispering a different word. Some begged, some cursed, some laughed. Sarah shrieked, crawling backward on her hands and knees, tears streaking her face. "We can't fight that. We can't fight any of this." The giant shadow leaned down, its gaping central mouth yawning wide enough to swallow them whole. The friends pressed together instinctively, their backs to the sealed chapel doors, the red glow of the cracks beneath them now a pulsating heartbeat. The smell of decay filled the air, sour and overwhelming, as the monstrous figure prepared to consume them. And then, just as the shadow lunged, the chapel bells rang, a deafening, metallic toll that shook the entire building to its foundation. The sound cut through the shrieking, through the whispers, through the storm outside. Every shadow froze, trembling violently as if the bell's tones scalded them. The corpse's glowing eyes flared once, then dimmed, its gaping mouth twisting into a snarl. The bells tolled again, louder, echoing into the night. Somewhere in the distance, far beyond the chapel walls, something else had awakened. The corpse screamed at the sound. Its jaw cracked wider than ever before, tearing flesh and ligaments as an inhuman shriek poured out, louder than the tolling bell itself. The walls of the chapel shuddered, dust raining from the rafters, as if the very stones recoiled from the noise. The candles flared violently, their flames bending inward toward the creature, as though sucked by its cry. The friends clapped their hands over their ears, but it wasn't enough. The scream vibrated inside their skulls, rattling their teeth, making blood drip from their noses. It wasn't just noise. It was rage. The bells had struck something ancient inside the corpse, something it couldn't control. The massive shadow, looming above them, faltered at the sound of the bell, but didn't dissolve. Instead, it convulsed violently, its dozens of mouths opening and snapping shut, as if choking on the toll. Then, in a burst of fury, it lunged forward again, aiming straight for the group. Michael shoved Emily behind him and swung his makeshift weapon with all his strength, hitting nothing but smoke. But the tolling bell interrupted the shadow mid-swipe. It recoiled like it had been burned, its form writhing and shrinking back toward the altar. Josh, still clutching his bleeding hand, gasped, "The bells! They're holding it back! They're the only thing keeping it from tearing us apart." His voice shook, but his words were clear. The others looked around frantically, expecting to see the chapel's bell tower swaying overhead. But the sound wasn't coming from above. No ropes moved, no bells hung. The sound came from deeper within the building, below them, beneath the altar itself. "The bells are inside," Sarah whispered, her voice quivering, her eyes fixed on the glowing cracks that pulsed brighter with every toll. "They're not protecting us. They're calling something." The corpse dropped back to the altar, as though the tolling had pinned it there. Its eyes blazed like molten fire, its arms thrashing violently, as if trying to tear itself free from invisible chains. Each ring of the bell drew another guttural scream from its throat, until the air grew thick with overlapping sounds, shriek and toll, rage and summoning. The shadows writhed in the corners, unable to approach the group, but too restless to vanish. Emily, shaking, grabbed Michael's arm. "We need to get out, now, before whatever that bell is calling arrives." But Michael shook his head. "The doors are sealed. The windows, too. Haven't you noticed? We're trapped here. Whoever built this place, they meant for people to find it. They meant for us to be here." The seventh toll came, long and hollow, reverberating through their bones. And for the first time, the corpse stopped screaming. Its mouth snapped shut with a wet smack, and its head tilted slowly toward them. When it opened its mouth again, it didn't shriek, it spoke. The words were guttural, broken, layered with multiple voices, but clear enough to freeze their blood. "The ride is not yours to end." The candles blew out in unison. The chapel was plunged into darkness, save for the red glow of the cracks beneath their feet. The bells tolled once more, louder than ever, shaking the altar, splitting the stone floor wide. From that widening fissure beneath the corpse, something vast began to stir. And the friends realized, too late, that the corpse had only been the prelude. The floor split open beneath them. The red glow from the cracks surged upward in a blinding flare, painting the chapel in blood-colored light. The friends staggered back as chunks of stone collapsed into the widening fissure, revealing a void that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. From the depths rose a fetid gust of air, hot and sour, carrying the stench of rotting earth and old bones. The altar trembled violently, toppling forward into the pit, dragging with it the corpse that had been perched there. Yet the creature didn't fall. It hovered, suspended above the abyss, as if the chasm itself held it aloft. Its eyes blazed brighter, its skin peeling away in strips that floated upward, feeding into the massive shadow still coiled above. The bells tolled again, now so loud that the sound fractured the stained glass windows. Shards rained down, cutting into the friend's skin. but none dared move. They were transfixed by what clawed its way up from the chasm. An arm longer than any human's, its skin gray and glistening, tipped with fingers like spears. Another followed, grasping the edges of the broken stone floor. The chapel shook as a colossal shape began to rise, its size dwarfing the corpse and even the towering shadow. Emily clutched Sarah's hand so tightly, their knuckles went white. "It's not just one of them," Emily whispered, barely breathing. "It's something worse, something older." Josh fell to his knees, eyes wide, blood dripping freely from his injured hand. He pointed toward the pit with trembling fingers. "That's what the bells were for," he said hoarsely. "Not to scare it, not to stop it. They were ringing it awake." His words were nearly drowned out by the grinding roar of stone splitting apart, as the thing below forced itself higher, its body pressing against the crumbling walls of the chapel's foundation. The corpse, still suspended above the pit, let out a guttural laugh, gutted and raw. It tilted its head back as the shadow slithered toward the rising giant, merging with it, wrapping its smoky tendrils around its limbs. The dozens of mouths on the shadow's body snapped in unison, chanting words in a language none of the friends could understand. But the meaning was clear enough. The corpse, the shadow, and the bells were all servants to this greater horror. Michael stumbled backward, dragging Emily with him. His voice cracked as he shouted, "We need to find another way out, anything. If this thing gets free, we won't just die here. It'll follow us. It'll follow everyone." His words barely left his mouth when the ground gave another violent lurch, throwing them against the chapel doors. The wood groaned, the locks rattling, as if the force from below was trying to hurl them open. The creature's head began to rise above the fissure at last. It wasn't human, nor was it animal. Its skull-like face stretched impossibly wide, rows of jagged teeth glowing faintly in the red light. Where its eyes should have been were only hollow pits that burned like furnaces, sucking in the very air around them. A low, guttural growl thundered from its throat, shaking the rafters loose above. For the first time since stepping into the chapel, Michael wished the doors had stayed sealed. The doors burst open behind them. For a split second, hope surged in their chests, but it died just as quickly when they saw what waited on the other side. The storm still raged outside, but the desert road was gone. In its place stretched an endless black plain, illuminated only by flashes of crimson lightning that split the sky. Twisted shapes moved in the distance, figures that walked like men, but bent at impossible angles, their limbs jerking like broken marionettes. Every flash of lightning revealed them a little closer, their eyeless faces snapping toward the chapel, as though they could sense the living trapped inside. Emily screamed, her voice echoing across the void. She turned to run back toward the fissure, only to freeze when the colossal creature let out a bellow that shook the entire chapel. The pit widened further, half the floor collapsing into the abyss. The friends barely scrambled back before the edge gave way, sending splinters of stone and wood crashing downward. The thing's massive body continued to climb. Every inch it rose, making the chapel seem smaller and smaller. Josh, clutching the pew for balance, shouted over the noise, It's not letting us leave. The door doesn't lead out anymore. It leads into its world. His eyes were wide with despair, blood dripping from his ears as the bell's toll pounded through his skull. We're not escaping. We're already inside it. Sarah grabbed him, shaking him violently. No, there has to be a way. There always is. But even as she spoke, her voice faltered, because she could see it too. The plane outside wasn't real. It was part of whatever had been conjured here, part of the trap that had been laid long before they ever arrived on Route 66. The last ride wasn't a metaphor. It was a ritual, and they were the final passengers. The corpse, still hovering over the pit, tilted its head toward them. Its mouth opened again, that layered voice dripping with mockery. The bell has chosen. You came to ride. You cannot walk away. As it spoke, the shadows surged, pouring from its body like black smoke, stretching toward the open doors. The twisted figures outside began to run, their movements twitching and inhuman, racing for the chapel with jerks so fast they blurred in the stormlight. Michael grabbed Emily's wrist and pulled her toward the door, desperation overtaking reason. If it's a trap, then we fight our way through it. I don't care what's waiting out there. We can't stay here with that. He pointed toward the rising creature, whose skull-like face now towered above them, drool hissing as it struck the glowing fissure below. The ninth toll of the bell rang out, long and low, vibrating the air until it felt like their bones would snap. The figures outside shrieked in unison, their voices merging into a single, agonized wail. The colossal beast let out a roar in reply, its voice deeper, older, like the earth itself was screaming. And for the first time, the friends understood. They weren't hearing the bells anymore. They were inside the bell. The final toll began. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was a force, a crushing wave of resonance that tore through flesh, bone, and spirit alike. The air in the chapel convulsed, every candle exploding into sparks, every splinter of wood rattling violently. The friends screamed as one, their bodies hurled to the ground, blood pouring from their ears and eyes. The corpse spread its arms wide, as though basking in triumph, its hollow sockets burning with red fire. Beneath it, the colossal beast finally rose free of the fissure, its entire body unfurling, a grotesque titan of shadows and bone that stretched from the pit to the ceiling. Its head scraped the rafters, splitting the wood like matchsticks, and yet its form seemed endless, vanishing upward into a void no one could comprehend. The twisted figures from the plain outside surged into the chapel, their eyeless faces twisted into grotesque smiles, their bodies moving in sharp, jerking spasms. They did not attack. They knelt. Row upon row of them bowed toward the beast, chanting in unison the same phrase that had been whispered since the first toll. The ride is not yours to end. The chapel itself warped around them, the walls elongating, stretching into an impossible tunnel of red stone and black smoke. The friends realized with dawning horror that the church wasn't a building at all. It was the carriage, the vessel for their last ride. Michael, coughing blood, forced himself to his knees. "We can't let it finish," he rasped. His eyes darted to the altar, or what remained of it, stone shards glowing with the same red light as the pit. He grabbed one, its heat searing his palm, and lifted it high. "If this thing is a bell, then maybe we break it." He staggered toward the fissure, every step dragging as if the air itself resisted him. The corpse let out a guttural roar, shadowy claws whipping toward him, but Emily and Sarah threw themselves in the way, screaming as the darkness tore across their skin. Michael reached the edge and hurled the glowing shard into the pit. For one breathless second, silence reigned. The tolling stopped. The beast froze. The corpse turned its blazing eyes toward him with something like shock. Then the pit erupted. A blinding surge of light engulfed the chapel, swallowing shadow, beast, and corpse alike. The twisted figures shrieked, their forms bursting into black mist as the tunnel collapsed. The friends were flung backward, the world imploding around them in a roar that was not thunder, not wind, but the sound of reality tearing apart. When the light faded, the chapel was gone. The road stretched out before them again. Desert, sand, the endless line of Route 66. Their car stood waiting, doors open as if they had never left it. The friends staggered toward it, broken, bleeding, but alive. Michael glanced back once, and his blood turned to ice. In the distance, far down the highway, stood the chapel. Perfect, untouched, its doors wide open, the faint sound of a bell echoing across the desert night. And above it, written in lightning across the sky, were words that made his soul wither. One ride ends, another begins.